Colorado exists as a place where geological time reveals itself in layers, where ancient forces shape terrain so varied that a single day's journey can transport you from alpine tundra to desert sands, from steaming mineral springs to cliff faces carved by human hands centuries ago. The state sprawls across the heart of the Rocky Mountains, but that simple description barely captures the complexity of what unfolds across its 104,000 square miles. Here, elevation creates ecosystems that shift dramatically within short distances, and the landscape tells stories written over millions of years, punctuated by the briefer but no less compelling narratives of human habitation and exploration. The high country defines much of Colorado's character, those soaring peaks that rake the sky and challenge anyone who ventures into their domain. Mount Elbert rises to 14,440 feet, the highest summit in the Rockies. But it's just one of 53 14ers that punctuate the state's spine. These mountains aren't merely scenic backdrops. They create weather patterns, harbor ecosystems found nowhere else, and demand respect from everyone who enters their realm. Snow can fall in July at these elevations, where oxygen thins and the air carries a crystalline clarity that makes distant features appear deceptively close. The alpine zones above treeline bloom briefly in summer, carpeted with miniature wildflowers that have adapted to fierce winds, intense UV radiation, and a growing season measured in weeks rather than months. Picas chirp warnings from boulder fields where they gather vegetation for winter, and ptarmigans blend into the rocks, like their plumage changing with the seasons. Driving these heights offers experiences unlike anywhere else in the lower 48 states. Trail Ridge Road cuts through Rocky Mountain National Park, climbing to 12,183 feet and maintaining elevations above 11,000 feet for 11 miles. The road opened in 1932, an engineering achievement that followed ancient game trails used by indigenous peoples for thousands of years. When you drive this route, particularly in early summer when snowbanks still tower beside the pavement, you enter a world stripped to essentials: rock, sky, wind, and the occasional flash of movement from elk or bighorn sheep constitute the entire universe at this elevation. The tundra stretches in gentle undulations, are deceptive in its appearance because what looks like a short walk across level ground might take hours through terrain that exhausts even experienced hikers. Pull into one of the overlooks and step out of your vehicle, and the wind hits immediately, carrying cold even on warm days, smelling of snow and stone and something indefinably clean. Pikes Peak offers another high-altitude journey, though this one climbs even higher to 14,115 feet. The Pikes Peak Highway winds 19 miles from the mountain's base, switchbacking through multiple life zones. You begin among ponderosa pines and Douglas firs, their scent warming in the sun, then climb through forests of Engelmann spruce and subalpine fir before emerging above treeline. Catherine Lee Bates stood atop Pikes Peak in 1893 and found inspiration for America the Beautiful, those purple mountain majesties and fruited plains spreading before her in a panorama that encompassed much of the state's geography. The summit experience can be surreal, particularly when clouds gather below, transforming the mountain into an island floating in a white sea. The air station at the top was once used for testing combustion engines in low-oxygen environments, and climbers participate in the annual Pikes Peak Marathon, racing to the summit and back in times that seem impossible given the elevation gain and oxygen deprivation. Independence Pass between Aspen and Twin Lakes reaches 12,095 feet, the highest paved-through road in North America. This route closes in winter, buried under snow too deep for practical clearing. But when open, it provides access to some of Colorado's most dramatic high country. The Sawatch Range rises to the south, containing the highest concentration of 14ers anywhere. The Continental Divide runs through here, that conceptual line where water flowing east eventually reaches the Atlantic, while water flowing west travels toward the Pacific. Near the summit, you can stand with legs apart and theoretically send rain from each foot toward different oceans, though the reality involves far more complex hydrology. The pass area blooms spectacularly in July and August, the brief growing season creating urgency in alpine flowers that carpet available ground with purples, yellows, and reds. These mountain roads grant access, but they also underscore how much of Colorado remains wild and unroaded. The wilderness areas contain millions of acres accessible only on foot or horseback, where trails lead into basins that look much as they did before European contact. The Maroon Bells near Aspen are perhaps the most photographed peaks in North America, their layered sedimentary rocks creating striped patterns of red and gray, reflected perfectly in Maroon Lake when conditions cooperate. The Bells themselves are notorious for their crumbly rock, more dangerous to climb than many higher peaks, but their beauty is undeniable. Sunrise here, when autumn aspens glow gold and the peaks catch first light, creates moments that seem almost too perfect to be real. Yet Colorado's geography encompasses far more than mountains. Drive southeast from the high peaks, and the land gradually descends through rolling hills and grasslands until something unexpected emerges from the prairie. The great sand dunes rise improbably against the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, North America's tallest dunes reaching 750 feet high and covering 30 square miles. These dunes shouldn't exist here, and their presence requires explanation. Over millions of years, the San Luis Valley served as a vast lake bed. Rivers carried sediments from surrounding mountains, depositing them on the valley floor. As the lake evaporated and dried, winds picked up these fine particles and drove them northeast toward the Sangre de Cristos. The mountains created a natural trap, and seasonal wind reversals prevented the sand from blowing away. The result is this improbable erg, and these mountains of sand that shift constantly, yet remain essentially in place, held by the valley's geometry. Walking the dunes offers a unique physical experience. The sand gives way with each step, making progress laborious. On hot summer days, surface temperatures can exceed 150 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to burn bare feet. Yet dig down just inches, and the sand remains cool, insulated from the sun's intensity. Climb to the high ridges, and you gain views across the valley, the scale of the dune field becoming apparent. Winds sculpt the sand into knife-edge ridges that collapse as you cross them, and the patterns change continuously. After dark, when summer heat radiates away into the clear atmosphere, temperatures can drop 50 degrees or more. The dunes become a different place entirely under starlight. Tries the Milky Way visible in stunning detail, shooting stars frequent, and the silence profound. Medano Creek flows along the dune's eastern edge, fed by snowmelt from the Sangres. This creek exhibits unusual behavior, creating surge flows or waves every few minutes during peak runoff. Sand deposits create temporary dams that periodically collapse, sending pulses of water downstream. Kids wade and play in the creek during late spring and early summer when flows peak, the water icy cold despite air temperatures that might reach 90 degrees. The creek typically dries by midsummer, sinking into the sand, but during peak season it provides a cooling counterpoint to the hot dunes. The dunes ecosystem supports species found nowhere else. The giant sand treader camelback cricket lives only here, having evolved to thrive in this specialized environment. Kangaroo rats and other rodents adapted to arid conditions make homes in the sand, emerging at night to feed on seeds and insects. Predators, including swift foxes and coyotes, patrol the edges, and overhead, ravens ride thermals that rise from heated sand. Plants struggle for purchase in this shifting substrate, but certain grasses and shrubs manage to colonize the dunes' edges, helping to stabilize them marginally. The preservation of Great Sand Dunes as a national park protects this geological oddity from threats that once loomed large. Water rights in the San Luis Valley were contested, with proposals to pump groundwater potentially affecting the water table that helps maintain the dunes. The sand itself was eyed for commercial extraction. Now protected, the dunes continue their ancient cycle of erosion and deposition. Wind and water engaged in an endless conversation that creates this remarkable landscape. Southwest from the dunes, Colorado's character shifts again as you enter the high plateau country that merges with Utah's canyonlands. Here, Mesa Verde rises above the Montezuma Valley, a tableland carved by canyons where ancestral Puebloans built their most impressive cliff dwellings. Between roughly 600 and 1300 CE, these people farmed the mesa tops, hunted surrounding areas, and created communities that grew increasingly complex. The cliff dwellings they constructed in the 1200s represent the culmination of their architectural achievements, though they occupied them for less than a century before abandoning the area. Cliff Palace is the largest dwelling. containing about 150 rooms and 23 kivas, those circular ceremonial chambers that were central to Pueblo and religious life. The dwelling nestles into a massive alcove carved by water seeping through sandstone, then freezing and thawing in cycles that slowly dissolved the softer rock layers. The alcove provided natural shelter from precipitation and helped moderate temperature swings. The builders used sandstone blocks, wooden beams, and mud mortar to construct multi-story structures that have endured over 7 centuries. The masonry shows sophistication, with different construction techniques visible in various sections, suggesting either evolution of methods or work by different groups. Walking through these dwellings, even under the constraints required to preserve them, it connects you viscerally to the people who lived here. The walls still bear finger marks in mortar, the actual impressions left by builders. Soot from cooking fires darken ceilings. Doorways are small, requiring you to duck or crouch, designed for smaller-statured people, or perhaps built small to conserve heat. Kivas descend into the earth, their upper portions incorporated into the cliff structures. The sipapu, a small hole in the kiva floor representing the mythical opening through which people emerged into this world, remains visible in some chambers. The mesa top reveals the agricultural foundations of this society. Thousands of archaeological sites scatter across Mesa Verde's surface, most representing surface dwellings occupied before the move to cliff houses. Dry farming in this environment required careful water management, and the Puebloans built check dams and terraces to slow runoff and encourage infiltration. They grew corn, beans, and squash, supplementing these staples with wild foods including piñon nuts, prickly pear, and various seeds. Turkeys provided both food and feathers, with evidence suggesting they were domesticated or at least kept in captivity. Why did they leave? Drought stress played a role, with tree ring data showing severe dry periods in the late 1200s. But societies had weathered droughts before. Likely a combination of environmental stress, resource depletion, social changes, and perhaps conflict led to migration. The ancestral Puebloans didn't disappear. Their descendants became the modern Pueblo peoples of New Mexico and Arizona, who maintain cultural and spiritual connections to Mesa Verde. The cliff dwellings stand as monuments to human ingenuity and adaptability, but also as reminders of environmental limits and the impermanence of even the most impressive settlements. The preservation story at Mesa Verde begins with recognition of the ruins' importance in the late 1800s, when ranchers and cowboys exploring the canyons stumbled upon the cliff dwellings. Early visitors took artifacts, and pot hunters damaged sites searching for items to sell. Concerned citizens pushed for protection, and Mesa Verde became a national park in 1906, one of the first parks specifically created to preserve cultural rather than purely natural resources. Archaeological work here helped establish standards for American archaeology, and ongoing research continues revealing details about how these people lived. And the environment around Mesa Verde shares characteristics with much of southwestern Colorado, where high desert meets mountain influences. Piñon pines and junipers dominate the vegetation, their gnarled forms adapted to thin soils and limited water. In spring, wildflowers briefly transform the landscape, painting slopes with lupine, paintbrush, and penstemon. Mule deer are common, and black bears occasionally wander through. Mountain lions maintain territories in the rougher country, seldom seen, but definitely present. The air carries scents of sun-warmed pine resin and sage, particularly potent after summer thunderstorms. Those storms themselves become spectacles in this country. Cumulus clouds build through summer afternoons, towering into the atmosphere until they release rain in localized bursts. Lightning strikes are frequent, dangerous, and dramatic. Flash floods can roar down dry washes within minutes, carrying debris and transforming trickles into raging torrents. The violence passes quickly, leaving behind fresh scents and temporarily refreshed vegetation. Rainbows arch across clearing skies, sometimes as double arcs stretching from horizon to horizon. Colorado's water story shapes everything, and nowhere is this more evident than in the state's hot springs, where geothermal heat brings water to the surface at temperatures that can exceed 130 degrees Fahrenheit. Glenwood Springs hosts the world's largest hot springs pool, a massive facility fed by the springs that drew people long before European settlement. The Ute people knew these waters, using them for healing and spiritual purposes. Early settlers recognized commercial potential, and the area developed as a resort destination. Doc Holliday, the famous gunfighter dying of tuberculosis, spent his final months in Glenwood Springs, hoping the climate and mineral waters might prolong his life. He died there in 1887 at age 36 and is buried in the local cemetery overlooking the valley. The springs themselves result from water percolating deep into the earth through fractures in the rock, heated by geothermal gradients, then rising back to the surface. The water emerges mineral-rich, having dissolved calcium, sulfur, and other elements during its underground journey. Soaking in these natural hot pools creates a unique sensation, the heat penetrating muscles, while the mineral content gives the water a distinctive feel and sometimes a subtle sulfur smell. The large pool in Glenwood maintains a temperature around 90 degrees, comfortable for extended soaking, while a smaller therapy pool reaches 104 degrees. Pagosa Springs, farther south, contains even hotter springs, with water emerging from the mother spring at temperatures near 144 degrees. This ranks among the world's deepest geothermal hot springs, with the water originating from depths around 2 miles. The town developed around these springs, and several facilities offer access to various pools cooled to different temperatures. Soaking here while snow falls creates an almost surreal experience. The contrast between hot water and cold air producing steam that rises in billowing clouds. The mineral content gives the water a slightly slippery feel, and believers attribute various healing properties to the different mineral combinations found in various springs. Ouray, tucked into a spectacular box canyon in the San Juan Mountains, maintains a natural hot springs pool that draws visitors year-round. The town itself qualifies as scenic enough to earn its nickname as Switzerland of America, with peaks rising steeply on all sides and waterfalls visible from downtown. The Hot Springs Pool sits at the north end of town, offering views of the surrounding mountains while you soak. In winter, steam rises dramatically as sub-freezing air meets water temperatures around 100 degrees. Ice formations grow along the pool edges, and the warm water creates a refuge from harsh winter cold. Summer brings different pleasures. With evening soaks under star-filled skies, and the sound of the Uncompahgre River rushing past nearby. The San Juan Range, where Ouray sits, contains some of Colorado's most dramatic and mineral-rich mountains. Mining shaped this region's history, with gold and silver strikes bringing thousands of people into incredibly difficult terrain. The $1 Million Highway connecting Ouray to Silverton ranks among America's most spectacular and nerve-wracking mountain roads, climbing over Red Mountain Pass at 11,018 feet with sheer drops and no guardrails in sections. The road earned its name either from the $1 million per mile construction cost or the gold ore in the roadbed itself, depending on which story you believe. Driving this route requires attention, but the scenery stuns. Waterfalls cascade down cliffsides. In autumn, aspens glow gold against dark conifers, and the peaks rise in serrated ranks. In winter, the highway becomes an adventure, regularly closed by avalanches or simply buried under snow too deep for passage. Silverton sits at 9,318 feet elevation in a high valley ringed by 13ers and 14ers. The town preserves its Victorian mining character, with original buildings lining Blair Street and a museum documenting the boom years. The narrow-gauge railroad from Durango still runs, carrying tourists through spectacular canyon country along the same route that once hauled ore and supplies. The train follows the Animas River, which carved a deep gorge through resistant rock over millions of years. The engineering required to lay track through this terrain was formidable, with the railroad completed in 1882 to serve the mining camps. Riding the train offers glimpses of country inaccessible by road, where cliffsides tower overhead and the river rushes far below. Steam locomotives still pull many trains, their whistles echoing off canyon walls. The journey through the canyon takes about 3.5 hours each way, plenty of time to watch the landscape shift from the high desert scrubland around Durango into dense forests of pine and aspen. The tracks hug the mountainside, sometimes so close to the edge that it feels like the train is floating above the gorge. In autumn, the aspen groves turn golden, their leaves shimmering against dark evergreens and gray rock faces. Winter brings a different magic, with icicles hanging from the cliffs and snow blanketing the forest floor. The railroad operates year-round, though schedules shift with the seasons, and each trip offers a new perspective on this rugged corridor. Silverton itself sits in a high mountain basin surrounded by peaks that reach well above 13,000 feet. The town preserves much of its Victorian-era architecture, with wooden storefronts and narrow streets that look much as they did during the mining boom. At 9,200 feet elevation, the air is thin and the climate harsh, with winter lasting well into spring. Snow can fall in any month, and summer afternoons often bring thunderstorms that roll down from the peaks with dramatic speed. The town's isolation adds to its character. Only 2 paved roads lead in and out, and during heavy snowfall, those routes can close for days. From Silverton, adventurous travelers can continue south on the $1 Million Highway, a stretch of road that ranks among the most spectacular and nerve-wracking drives in the country. The highway climbs over Red Mountain Pass, topping out at nearly 11,000 feet, with sheer drops on one side and towering cliffs on the other. There are sections without guardrails, where the pavement runs right to the edge of precipitous drops. The road was blasted through solid rock in the 1880s, originally as a toll road connecting mining camps. Its name supposedly comes from the cost of construction or the value of gold ore in the roadbed fill, though the exact origin remains debated. Either way, the name fits. The views are worth far more than money can measure. The highway descends through forests of spruce and fir, passing old mine sites where weathered buildings cling to impossible slopes. Avalanche paths scar the mountainsides, their wide swaths cleared of trees marking where winter snows have repeatedly crashed down. In late spring and early summer, wildflowers carpet the high meadows in purple, yellow, and red. Columbines, the state flower, nod on delicate stems alongside Indian paintbrush and lupine. The variety of microclimates along this route means you might drive through several seasons in the span of an hour, from alpine tundra to subalpine forest to the transitional zones where ponderosa pine begins to appear. The town of Ouray marks the northern end of the $1 Million Highway, nestled in a natural amphitheater of soaring cliffs. Known as the Switzerland of America for its dramatic setting, Ouray has reinvented itself as a destination for outdoor recreation while maintaining its historic mining town character. The hot springs here draw visitors year-round, with naturally heated water bubbling up from deep underground, where the Earth's crust heats groundwater to temperatures exceeding 100 degrees. The main pool at Ouray Hot Springs Park maintains water around 104 degrees in sections, with cooler lanes for lap swimming. Steam rises from the water on cold mornings, creating an otherworldly scene with snow-covered peaks visible all around. The geology that creates these hot springs occurs throughout Colorado, where faults and fractures allow water to circulate deep into the earth and return heated to the surface. Glenwood Springs, farther north, features one of the world's largest hot springs pools, stretching over 400 feet and fed by springs producing millions of gallons daily. The Ute people considered these waters sacred and used them for healing long before European settlers arrived. Today, soaking in these thermal waters offers a timeless form of relaxation, the warmth easing tired muscles while the mountain air cools your face. East of the San Juan Mountains, the landscape transitions again as you move toward the Great Sand Dunes. The approach from any direction seems incongruous. There shouldn't be massive sand dunes rising against a backdrop of 13,000-foot peaks. Yet there they are, some of the tallest dunes in North America, climbing over 700 feet high. The dunes accumulated over tens of thousands of years as prevailing winds swept sand from the valley floor against the mountains. Water and ice from the mountains create Medano and Sand Creeks, which flow along the edge of the dune field in spring, recycling sand that washes downstream back to where winds can pick it up again. It's a system in constant motion, with sand grains making endless circuits from dune to creek to valley floor and back. Walking on the dunes feels like stepping into another world entirely. The sand shifts underfoot, making the climb up the tallest dunes surprisingly strenuous. From the parking area, the high dune seems relatively close, but the scale is deceptive, and what looks like a 20-minute walk turns into an hour or more of trudging through soft sand. The payoff comes at the summit, where the view extends across waves of sand in all directions, with the Sangre de Cristo Mountains rising dramatically to the east and the San Juans visible far to the west. The dunes create their own patterns and textures, shaped by wind into knife-edge ridges and smooth crescents. In morning or evening light, the shadows emphasize every ripple and contour. The temperature swings on the dunes can be extreme. Summer days see surface temperatures reach well above 140 degrees, hot enough to burn bare feet, while nights cool dramatically at this 8,000-foot elevation. Spring brings runoff from the mountains, and Medano Creek swells enough to become a shallow, wide stream where kids splash and play in the cold water with the dunes as a surreal backdrop. The flow creates waves in the sand streambed, a phenomenon that makes the water appear to surge in rhythmic pulses. By late summer, the creek often dries to nothing, and the dune field expands to its maximum extent. North from the dunes, the Sangre de Cristo Range presents some of Colorado's most rugged terrain, with peaks that see far fewer visitors than the more accessible ranges near Denver or Aspen. The name means blood of Christ, supposedly given by Spanish explorers who saw the peaks turn deep red in sunset light. These mountains hold small glaciers in protected cirques, remnants of the last ice age that persist in spots where winter snow accumulates faster than summer can melt it. The range runs for roughly 75 miles, a spine of high peaks separating the San Luis Valley from the wet mountain valley to the east, heading back toward the Front Range. You pass through an ecological transition zone where the dry climate of the western slope gives way to slightly more moisture from weather systems moving in from the plains. Colorado Springs sits at the base of Pikes Peak, one of the state's most famous mountains despite not being among the highest. The peak reaches 14,115 feet, and unlike many Colorado 14ers, you can reach the summit by car or cog railway. The road to the top follows a route established in the early 1900s, climbing through multiple climate zones with dozens of switchbacks. The railway, dating to 1891, grinds slowly upward on steep grades that required special engineering to prevent the cars from sliding backward. The summit of Pikes Peak offers extraordinary views on clear days. With the Great Plains stretching east to the horizon and multiple mountain ranges visible to the west and south. The air is thin enough that physical exertion becomes noticeably difficult, and altitude sickness affects many visitors who ascend too quickly from lower elevations. The weather on the summit bears no relationship to conditions at the base. Snow can fall any day of the year, and winds sometimes exceed 100 miles per hour. The temperature on the summit averages below freezing even in July, while Colorado Springs, 7,000 feet below, might be sweltering at 90 degrees. The Garden of the Gods, just outside Colorado Springs, presents yet another dramatic geological feature. Here, massive red sandstone formations tilt at severe angles. They thrust upward when the Rockies formed and exposed by millions of years of erosion. The rocks glow brilliant red-orange in morning and evening light, earning names like Balanced Rock and Kissing Camels for their distinctive shapes. The formations are made of ancient beach and dune sand, deposited when this region lay at the edge of a vast inland sea roughly 300 million years ago. The sand was buried, compressed into stone, then tilted nearly vertical by the same tectonic forces that built the mountains. Walking the paths among these formations provides an up-close look at the layers, cross-bedding, and textures preserved in the rock. Technical rock climbers test their skills on these walls, their colorful ropes and gear standing out against the red stone. The park sits at the junction of the mountains and plains, so wildlife from both ecosystems appears here. Mule deer browse among the rocks, and occasionally a bighorn sheep wanders down from higher elevations. Raptors, including golden eagles and prairie falcons, nest on the cliff faces, riding thermals that rise from the sun-warmed rocks. Denver itself represents the modern face of Colorado, a sprawling metropolitan area that has grown explosively over recent decades. The city sits exactly 1 mile above sea level, marked on the state capitol steps where the 15th step is engraved with that elevation. From Denver's downtown skyscrapers, the Front Range rises to the west, a wall of mountains that appears remarkably close on clear days. The proximity of major peaks to a major city is part of what makes Colorado unique. You can leave downtown Denver and be above tree line within an hour and a half, or on a ski slope in less time than that. The cultural scene in Denver has evolved considerably, with museums, venues, and a food culture that draws from the state's agricultural heritage and its influx of residents from other regions. The Denver Art Museum holds significant collections of Native American art, particularly from tribes of the Great Plains and Southwest. These collections tell stories of peoples who thrived in this region for thousands of years before European contact, developing sophisticated societies adapted to environments that newcomers found harsh and forbidding. The museum's architecture itself has become an attraction, with Daniel Libeskind's angular addition creating a striking landmark in the cityscape. Yet for all its urban development, Denver maintains strong connections to the landscapes that surround it. City parks preserve stretches of prairie and riparian habitat along the South Platte River. The river itself, which seems so small and unimpressive in the mountains, has gathered enough water by the time it reaches Denver to support cottonwood groves and wetlands that serve as migration corridors for birds traveling between northern breeding grounds and southern wintering areas. In spring and fall, these areas fill with warblers, tanagers, and dozens of other species stopping to rest and feed. Boulder, just north of Denver, sits right against the Flatirons, distinctive rock formations that lean at sharp angles against the mountainside. The town has cultivated an identity centered on outdoor recreation, environmental awareness, and a mix of counterculture and high-tech industry. The Boulder Creek Path runs for miles through town, following the stream that drains from the high country above. On summer weekends, the path fills with runners, cyclists, and people floating the creek on inner tubes. The University of Colorado campus spreads across the southern part of town, its red tile roofs and sandstone buildings set against a backdrop of ponderosa pine forest. The trails behind Boulder climb quickly into the foothills and then up into the high peaks of the Indian Peaks Wilderness. This protected area encompasses some of the most scenic terrain along the Front Range, with dozens of alpine lakes, expansive tundra, and peaks that scratch past 13,000 feet. Access is regulated through permit systems during peak season because the area's proximity to Denver and Boulder means it receives heavy use. Even with permits, the solitude available just a few miles from the trailhead can be profound, especially on weekdays or during the shoulder seasons. Rocky Mountain National Park, the crown jewel of Colorado's protected lands, sprawls across more than 400 square miles of high country. The park straddles the Continental Divide, with steep, glacier-carved valleys on both sides. Trail Ridge Road, which crosses the park, is the highest continuous paved road in the United States, topping out above 12,000 feet. The road typically opens in late May and closes with the first serious snowfall in October, its short season packed with visitors eager to drive above tree line and walk among the alpine wildflowers and tundra vegetation. Elk are abundant in Rocky Mountain National Park, and during autumn, the bugling of bulls echoes through valleys as the rut reaches its peak. The sound is haunting and primordial, a reminder that these mountains support large mammals that require extensive habitat. Moose, reintroduced to Colorado in the late 1970s, have established healthy populations in willow-lined streams and beaver ponds. Bighorn sheep inhabit the rocky slopes and cliffs, their sure-footedness on precipitous terrain almost defying belief. Mountain goats, though not native to this part of Colorado, were introduced in the 1940s and 50s and now inhabit some of the park's highest peaks. The park's popularity brings challenges, with parking lots overflowing on summer weekends and trails showing signs of overuse. A timed entry permit system implemented recently attempts to manage the crowds while still allowing access. The tension between preservation and access plays out in microcosm here. Everyone wants to experience these mountains, yet the very popularity threatens the qualities that make the park special. Finding a balance remains an ongoing process, one that will likely require continued adjustment as visitation patterns change. West of the park, the Colorado River headwaters flow through mountain meadows and small towns before entering the canyon country downstream. The river at this elevation bears little resemblance to the powerful force that carved the Grand Canyon. Here it's a modest stream, clear and cold, supporting populations of trout and the complex web of insects and small creatures they feed on. The Never Summer Mountains form the park's western boundary, their peaks holding small glaciers and extensive snowfields that feed the river even in late summer. Steamboat Springs, farther northwest, built its reputation on natural hot springs and deep powder snow. The town retains more of a working ranch community feel than some Colorado ski towns, with genuine cowboys still driving cattle through the streets during seasonal movements. The hot springs downtown still bubble up at temperatures around 100 degrees, just as they have for thousands of years. Ute people used these springs long before the town existed, and their history here stretches back beyond recorded time. And the ski area above Steamboat receives abundant snowfall from storms that sweep in from the northwest, often dropping lighter, drier snow than what falls on the I-70 corridor farther south. Champagne powder became the marketing term for this snow, and while it's partially promotional, there's truth to it. The combination of latitude, elevation, and storm track does produce notably good snow conditions. The mountain has developed significantly over the decades, but it maintains extensive tree skiing and long intermediate runs that appeal to a broad range of skiers. North Park, a high mountain valley ringed by peaks, remains one of Colorado's less developed areas. The valley sits above 8,000 feet, a broad basin filled with sagebrush and grasslands that support cattle ranching. The North Platte River begins here, flowing north into Wyoming before eventually joining the Missouri. Moose are common in the willows along the waterways, and pronghorn antelope race across the open flats at speeds that can top 50 miles per hour. The valley gets brutally cold in winter, with temperatures dropping well below zero and staying there for days at a time. The contrast between North Park's wide-open spaces and the heavily developed areas around ski resorts or Denver illustrates the range of landscapes and lifestyles Colorado encompasses. You can stand in the middle of North Park and see for miles in every direction, with only a few ranch buildings breaking the horizon. It's a landscape that hasn't changed fundamentally in a century, still dominated by natural processes and the rhythms of seasons rather than human schedules. Then you can drive a few hours and be in the middle of Vail or Aspen, where property values reach levels that would make a rancher's head spin, and where the built environment thoroughly dominates the natural one. This tension runs through the state's identity. Colorado attracts people seeking outdoor recreation and natural beauty, yet growth and development inevitably follow. Small mountain towns find themselves grappling with housing shortages, traffic, and the loss of local character as vacation homes proliferate and service workers can't afford to live where they work. The mining towns that went bust a century ago are now booming again for entirely different reasons, their historic buildings now housing galleries, restaurants, and boutiques rather than assay offices and saloons. Yet beyond the resort towns and the Front Range corridor, much of Colorado remains surprisingly empty. The eastern plains stretch for hours, a landscape of grain fields and grassland that many people speed through on their way to the mountains, never stopping to explore. The sandhills near the Nebraska border form strange grass-covered dunes that ripple across the countryside. Pronghorn outnumber people by considerable margins in some counties. At night, the stars blaze in skies undimmed by city lights, the Milky Way stretching overhead in a luminous band. The San Luis Valley, ringed by mountains and sitting at nearly 8,000 feet, is another place where the land retains an emptiness that feels almost sacred. The valley floor is broad and flat, irrigated fields making green squares against the tan earth. And the climate is harsh, with short growing seasons and fierce winds that sometimes strip topsoil from plowed fields. Yet people have lived here for millennia, finding ways to work with the land's constraints. Hispanic settlements here date to the early 1800s, some of the oldest continuously inhabited communities in Colorado. The San Luis People's Ditch, still in use, was granted by Mexico in 1852, making it one of the oldest water rights in the state. Water rights matter intensely in Colorado, where the semi-arid climate means water availability governs what's possible. The elaborate system of prior appropriation, where the first users established rights that persist today, creates situations where water flows past thirsty fields because someone downstream holds senior rights. The Trans-Mountain Diversion sent water from the western slope under the Continental Divide to feed Front Range cities, an engineering achievement that generated controversy when built and still creates tension. The Arkansas River, the South Platte, the Colorado. Each watershed has its own complex web of rights, compacts, and conflicts. Climate change adds another layer of complexity with earlier snowmelt, reduced snowpack, and longer dry periods between storms affecting water availability. Ski resorts invest heavily in snowmaking equipment to compensate for shorter seasons and less reliable natural snow. Farmers face decisions about which crops to plant as growing seasons shift. Forest managers watch beetle-killed trees create vast swaths of dead timber, fire fuel waiting for a spark. Say the 2020 and 2021 fire seasons saw multiple fires grow to over 100,000 acres, unprecedented in scale and intensity, burning through forests and into mountain communities. These challenges exist alongside the extraordinary beauty and the powerful draw of these landscapes. People continue moving to Colorado despite the costs and complications, seeking mountain access, outdoor recreation, and perhaps some idealized version of the Western lifestyle. The population growth strains infrastructure and resources while also bringing new energy and ideas. The state has become increasingly politically divided, with urban areas trending one direction and rural counties another, the rifts sometimes seeming as deep as the canyons carved through the rock. Yet standing in the right place at the right time, those divisions fade into irrelevance. Watching sunrise light hit the maroon bells, or floating down a desert river under a dome of stars, or climbing through fall colors toward a high alpine pass. These experiences connect directly to something fundamental. The rocks remember millions of years. The rivers carry ancient water. The wind shapes the land exactly as it has for longer than humans have existed. Colorado's landscapes offer perspective, a reminder that our concerns and conflicts play out against a backdrop that will persist long after we're gone. The challenge and the opportunity lie in how we choose to engage with these places. We can love them to death through overuse, or we can find ways to experience them that allow their essential character to persist. We can see them as commodities to extract value from, or as inheritances to pass along intact. The choice isn't really between preservation and use. These lands have always been used by indigenous peoples, and then by miners and ranchers, and now by recreationists and tourists. The question is, what kind of use honors the land's integrity while allowing human connection to it? Walking out from a trailhead in the pre-dawn darkness, watching the sky lighten and the peaks emerge from shadow, there's a sense of rightness that's hard to articulate. The cold air, the crunch of frost under boots, the gradual warming as the sun touches the high ridges, these simple things anchor you to the physical world in a way that daily life often doesn't. And when you reach the summit or the lake or the meadow you were aiming for, when you sit and rest and just look, the beauty is almost too much to process. And it fills your vision and your mind, making everything else seem very small and far away. That's what Colorado offers ultimately. Not escape from the world, but perspective on it. The mountains don't care about your deadlines or your anxieties. The rivers don't pause for your convenience. The weather does what it does, and you adapt or you leave. There's honesty in that, a clarity that can feel almost harsh, but that many people crave. And there's also joy, pure, uncomplicated pleasure in moving through beautiful country, in seeing light change on a cliff face, in breathing air so cold it makes your lungs ache. These landscapes have shaped the people who live among them, creating a culture that values independence, resilience, and a certain toughness. And they've also created an outdoor recreation industry that generates billions in economic activity. The dual nature of the relationship, spiritual and economic, personal and commercial, reflects broader American tensions about nature and value. We want wilderness to be pure and untouched, yet we also want to experience it ourselves. And we want the jobs and income that tourism brings. Reconciling these desires remains perpetually unfinished business. The state's history is written in the land itself, in mine tailings and ghost towns, in irrigation ditches and reservoirs, in roads blasted through impossible terrain and railroads that cling to canyon walls. Each generation has left its mark, for better and worse. Some of those marks will persist for centuries, like the toxic drainage from old mines that still pollute streams. And others fade more quickly, like the ski runs that revert to forest if abandoned. The land endures, patient and powerful, slowly erasing human traces or incorporating them into new patterns. Colorado's story is still being written, still evolving as the state grows and changes. The landscapes that attracted miners and ranchers now draw software engineers and remote workers. The mountains that challenged 19th century surveyors now host thousands of skiers on a busy weekend. The rivers that powered mining operations are now protected for rafting and fishing. Nothing stays static, and perhaps that's appropriate for a place defined by dramatic geology and constant environmental change. What remains constant is the power of these places to inspire awe and demand respect. Whether you're driving over a high pass, soaking in a hot spring, climbing a 14er, or just sitting beside a stream watching the water flow, Colorado's landscapes offer something essential. They remind us that we're small and temporary, but they also invite us to participate in their ongoing story. They're harsh and beautiful, accessible and remote, fragile and enduring, a collection of contradictions that somehow resolves into magnificence.